sales is the most lucrative skill in the world, period. The problem is most sales advice out there today is outdated, cheesy, and can even keep you from getting the deals that can make all the difference in your career. This is the No BS Sales School, a podcast for entrepreneurs and salespeople who want to master the skill of selling without all the BS. Welcome to the No BS Sales School podcast. I'm your host, Walker McKay. I want to talk to you today about how to start and hold a conversation with almost anybody. A lot of people say, oh, Walker, I don't like to go to networking events, or I don't know, because I don't just like to have, just these, I don't know how to start a conversation. I don't know how to talk to other people like that. That's just crazy. Well, I got to be honest with you, and as I try to be always, I hate bullshit conversations. I don't like lightweight, how's the weather, blah, blah, blah conversations. It bums me out. It's a waste of my time. I don't like it. I enjoy having much deeper conversations where I can really go and understand somebody better. That makes me excited. And it's something I think is really cool. And I think I picked this up from my father. My father was a great conversationalist. He had a sincere curiosity about other people. He wanted to know about other people, what made them tick, what they liked, what they didn't like, why that was the case, what they did for work, what they liked about that. And my dad told me this. Damn, I wish he told me earlier. I was like 32 or 33. He had to kind of, he gave me a warning or a message where he said, Walker, you need to work a whole lot harder at being interested instead of working so hard to be interesting. You need to work a whole lot harder at being interested instead of interesting, which was his nice way of saying, shut the hell up. Be quiet. Ask questions. Listen. Well, I know all of you in sales have all heard a whole lot about just got to ask questions. You got to ask questions. You got to ask questions. You got to ask the right. If they give you specific instructions, you got to ask the right questions, which again, bullshit, unactionable advice. But I want to show you how to start and hold a conversation with almost anybody. You've heard this before. What is people's favorite subject? It's themselves, right? And how often do you get to tell your story to other people? How often do you get to tell your story? My guess is that you listen to this podcast right now, and thank you for listening. You've had a pretty interesting life. Some pretty cool shit has happened to you. Some wild stuff has happened to you. And it's great that that's happened. But how often do you get to share that story? Probably not that often. So what if somebody let you share that story, was sincerely curious, not just working you, but sincerely curious about you, what you do, how you do it, who you are. So here's a secret. If you're at a cocktail party or a dinner party, or you're having lunch with somebody, or you're getting to know somebody on a weekend, whatever that is, probably a great dating tip too. There's this little framing that I like to use when I'm talking to people. It's called present, past, future. Present, past, future. So what in the hell is that? It's a way to structure a conversation. So it's a process. It's a system for having a conversation with somebody to understand them better, number one. And number two, have them see you as being charming. And that's what's so funny to me, is that most of the time we think in order to be charming, we've got to be the one that tells all these great stories and we've got to be up and, doing all this crazy stuff. Reality is, the more that you seek to understand somebody else, the more that you ask questions about somebody else and are sincere about the answers to those questions, that you're really paying attention, the more charming they'll think you are. Let your person you're talking to do the work. Let them answer the questions. And be sincerely curious about them and who they are and why they said that and where that came from, which is good advice in life. So present, past, future. Here's what that sounds like. If you let's put this in a relatively business context. Hey, What do you do? Present, right? What is going on in your present? What do you do? And they say, well, I'm a lawyer, or I am in the chemicals business. And you say, that sounds pretty cool. What does that mean? What kind of lawyer? What kind of chemicals business? Right? Interesting. So what does that mean you do on a daily basis? That's pretty wild. So this happens and this happens. What about this? What about that? Right? Try and understand what goes on in the world. And even if they say something like, I'm in sales. Okay, cool. What do you sell? I like to say, that sounds easy. That always gets people talking. I'm a chemical engineer. That sounds easy. And you smile. And they'll begin to tell you how freaking hard it is and what a pain in the ass it is and how hard they work, which is great information, right? What's going on in their present? And then we go back to past. How'd you get into that crazy business? What were you doing before you got in that business? Where'd you go to school? Did you study chemical engineering? Did you think you were going to be a lawyer when you were that young? What did you want to be? What was the path to get where you are? Now that you're here, what surprised you about being in that business? What's changed? All right. How did you get here? What does your past look like? Does your education match what you're doing now? How did you learn all this stuff? Right. Like another great question for present is, what's the hardest part about that? Let's go back to past, right? Was it a tough decision to get in that business? What were your other choices? What did you think your other choices might be? The questions are endless and limitless. It just depends upon how sincerely curious you are, how bad you want to know about what's going on with their world, right? And as you listen and you pay attention and you can ask follow-up questions. Here's the thing. People don't get asked follow-up questions very often unless they're in a court or being deposed, which is not a great place to be. I've been there. It sucks. But if you're sincerely curious and you want to know and you're digging into their present and their past, and then you say, okay, so you dug into the past. And again, this can take 5 minutes. It can take 2 minutes. It can take an hour and a half. Depends on how creative you are and how much time you may have and how much time you want to spend. And then you roll to future. So what does that look like? Let's pretend it's a couple of years from now. Things are going well. What will you be doing then? What might have changed? What would you hope would be happening then? How long you plan on working? What would you do after you stopped? All right. What does good look like? What does success look like for you? What are some of the things you're hoping to achieve in the future? And while these may feel like ridiculous questions, imagine if somebody took the time to ask you those things. Imagine if somebody took the time to ask you about what's going on in your present. What does that look like today? And they were sincerely curious and they asked a bunch of questions and they cared. And then they went back to ask how you got there. And then they moved on to say, what does the future look like for you? What do you hope will happen? What could get in the way of that? What I'm telling you is this allows you next time you see that person. And by the way, sitting next to somebody at a dinner table, they say, staying home with the kids. Great. How long you been doing that? What do you like about that? What's hard about that? What were you doing before that? A couple of years from now, do you still see yourself at home? You can do this with anyone. It's a great way to have a conversation. People think you're charming. They'll remember you and you can have something to remember them about. I'm Walker McKay with No BS Sales. Don't tell me that you don't like small talk. Great. I don't either. Don't let that be an excuse for not having great conversations with people. If you want help with your sales team, if you want help getting better at the career that feeds your family, if you're in sales or sales management, call me, 803-917-2817. DM me on the socials. I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place to catch me with a direct message. Thanks for listening. Share this with somebody else who needs to know.
Thanks for listening to the No BS Sales School podcast. If you haven't already, please take 1 minute to write a quick review for the show. It really does make a huge difference. Also, subscribe to the show and please forward this episode to somebody else who needs to hear it. As a bonus for listening, I'm going to give you access to a free mini course, 7 expensive sales mistakes you're making and what you can do about it. Go to www.7salesmistakes.com and get access to the free mini course. That's the number 7salesmistakes.com. Thanks again for listening to the OBS Sales School podcast.